All right.
Hi, my name is Scott Wade. I'm here at the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada. But there's a long story of how I got to this location. Let me take a moment and just kind of talk about that. I spent over 30 years working for the U.S. Department of Energy in a number of different roles, working on programs including environmental cleanup from the legacy of the Manhattan Project to disposition of parts of nuclear weapons. But after those programs, I retired and came to support the Atomic Museum here. But there's even another story that goes with that. Above and beyond my 30 years with the department goes to the legacy that I represent in this museum, and that goes to my father. So let me take a moment and kind of explain that. All my family, other than me, comes from the hard rock mines of Colorado. My father grew up and graduated from the small town of Cripple Creek, Colorado, where he ultimately went to the University of Colorado for only a semester and a half, and I'll come back to that. He left school, ultimately married my mom, started a family, but was trying to eke out a life actually doing uranium mining on the western slopes of Colorado in the 1950s. So hard life, trying to provide for a family at that time. So what he saw was an advertisement to come to work at the Nevada test site. And so in 1958, he moved the family out and went to work as a mining superintendent in the tunnels of the Nevada test site. He did that for about 3 years, and then because of his hard work, his kind of leadership skills, and as a miner, you know how to do a couple different things. You know how to use ground control. You also know how to use explosives. He was hired by Livermore National Laboratory to do a number of things, and before you know it, without any college degree, he was assembling nuclear weapons. One of the last things you do is you made nuclear material and explosives. So he did that for 8 years, then was hired by the Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor to today's Department of Energy. Worked his way up the ranks, managed a number of sites, ultimately retired in the late 1980s, working for President Reagan, managing the nation's nuclear weapons program. So he had over 70,000 employees, and he had a $13 to $15 billion budget. He would always say how amazed he was that he was surrounded by these folks with PhDs, often dual PhDs, brilliant folks, yet he had no college education. He felt a little bit uncomfortable about it, so he was always driven with a passion about education. And finally, the other thing he was interested in is making sure that those stories that went on at the Nevada test site, his over almost 40 years working in the complex, those stories get maintained. So he and a number of others in the late 1990s came up with an idea for a museum. And less than 5 years later, we have the National Atomic Testing Museum, which opened in 2005. Coming up with an idea for a museum, finding the funding for it, getting it done, and getting it done at almost light speed, that's amazing. I know nobody does that, but they were able to do it, to capture those stories. In fact, they had such dedication that even as they were preparing the final displays here for this museum, which we'll show you some key features on a little bit later, they didn't have enough money for the final matching dollars. So my parents and a number of others took out second mortgages on their houses. So that was their level of dedication. That's why it meant so much to them. So my father did pass away a few years ago, and after I retired, I felt it important to stay involved with this museum, to continue to share those stories, to continue to drive education.
That is a very cool, that shows a level of, like you said, dedication, but also how important it was to him to show what he and the other scientists and PhD holders did to save humanity, or at least the United States, maybe. How do you factor into all of this?
Well, again, my dad did things that and managed programs and worked on items that I never had the either ability or opportunity to work on. So his experiences were much different than mine. But there always was some shared things. Now, I did have a chance to just drive around the Nevada test site a couple times with Dad and just talk about some of the things he remembered back from the late 1950s to the 1960s, which is, you look at it in the 80s and 90s. I started out there in the late 1980s, but as you look at those things in the late 1980s, you're thinking, well, wow, it was a different time. There was a different cadence. When I started out there, we did an underground nuclear weapons test about once every 3 or 4 months. They were generally $75 to $100 million each test, so they were very expensive. But in the heyday of nuclear testing, particularly in the 1960s, they were doing 2 or 3 nuclear weapons tests a week, a cadence you just can't possibly imagine. And that site had such an impact, not just the lives of the workers, the 16,000 plus workers that were out there, but the growing city of Las Vegas. When Dad came out here, there maybe was 60,000 folks in Las Vegas. Today we have 2.5 million, approaching 3 million people. And a lot of folks just don't understand those stories. So there's shared interest that both Dad had in making sure that we could continue to share those stories, remind people about the sacrifices of the men and women that worked out there.
Would you say Las Vegas was more the atomic tourism at the time, and that helped grow it with the casinos, or because people used to come to Fremont Street and watch the atomic bombs detonate? Is that correct?
Again, before my time, but what I understand is, atomic tourism in the 1950s was a factor in Las Vegas. People would come for watch parties to watch in a above ground blast. This is back in the days of above ground nuclear testing, where you could see the flash, particularly at night, coming from the test site, or you might be able to see remnants of a mushroom cloud as it floated towards the east. Again, but you have to frame that with different public opinions back at that time. Coming out of World War II, this nation embraced kind of all things atomic, including atomic testing. But those beliefs, those perceptions changed with time. So what went on in the 1950s probably wouldn't have continued into the 60s or 70s as kind of society, including within Las Vegas, those interests changed. But it certainly did draw in a lot of interest back in those days, folks that just were interested in the novelty of it. In fact, there's some iconic pictures, Miss Atomic Bomb, Anna Lee Mahoney, I believe was her name, wearing what looks like a mushroom cloud swimsuit. Her arms are over her head. But that black and white image going back to the 1950s kind of captures everything that kind of atomic Las Vegas embraced back in that period.
So this building was not repurposed. It was built for this museum only, or is there other things in the building that go on here too?
So when they came up with the idea for having a museum, they had to figure out where to locate it. There were some initial displays set up across town, but you really needed somewhere that had at least 10,000 square feet of exhibit space so that you could show off some of the key artifacts and things that they'd been able to get in donation from the Department of Energy and its contractors around the United States. So they had a great dialogue with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and also with the Desert Research Institute. And between the two of them, it was decided that there was an opportunity that kind of met a couple of different needs. It would be able to construct a building that could host the National Atomic Testing Museum. It would also be able to host a Department of Energy function, the Atomic Testing Archives. There was a need to make sure there was a place that you could both record and maintain all of those records. So if people wanted to come and find out about a test that went on in the 1950s, and what was the dose rates, what was the measurements that went on at locations both on the test site and off the test site, they could get to that data. So there's a function called the Nuclear Test Archives that actually remains in this building today. And then lastly, there's the Desert Research Institute, its laboratories, its office space that goes on also in the building. So it's kind of a shared function between the three of us. When the museum opened, around 10,000 square feet, we've been able to expand into a couple of additional galleries. So we're around 14,000 square feet of exhibit space today.
Is there still nuclear testing going on as far as like the bombs and everything, or did that get stopped with Kennedy?
So again, nuclear testing first started in the Pacific. At the Nevada test site, it started in 1951. In fact, we're about to come up on the 75th anniversary. President Truman designated the Nevada Proving Grounds as a location for an on-continent nuclear test location. A total of 928 nuclear weapons tests were done out at what was ultimately named the Nevada test site. Those above ground and underground tests all stopped in 1992 when the president declared a moratorium. That was ultimately codified into a treaty with the Soviet Union, later on with the Russians and other parties. So there hasn't been an underground nuclear test since 1992. But the nation still has nuclear weapons, and there's still a need to make sure that they're both safe and reliable. And so the Department of Energy pivoted to a program called Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship, utilizing test programs both at the Nevada test site, or as it's named today, the Nevada National Security Site, and also at other locations, at Los Alamos, at Sandia National Laboratories, at Livermore, and other locations, to make sure that what still remains within the nuclear arsenal is safe and reliable.
Where do you get the artifacts from? Are they like, I'm looking at a TV and some JCPenney mannequins. Are those from the actual test site, or those recreations? I guess what I'm asking, are things in the museum authentic, or are they recreations?
Yes, many things in the museum are authentic. In fact, just behind me there's what's called a decoupler tube, the gigantic, what looks like a big metal tube just over my shoulders. That was actually from the Nevada test site and craned into this building even as they were putting up the superstructure. So that would be really hard to move if we had to move to a different location. But it was artifacts like that that go back to its actual use at the test site. That was part of horizontal testing that was done in our Mesa Tunnel complex out there. But we have many other artifacts that we'll show you as we walk around the test site that were loaned to us by the Department of Energy or its contractors. Some of them are recreations, but as much as possible we strove to bring in the real thing, things that have a connection with testing. We have a fisheye camera, something we would use to completely image an underground nuclear weapons test hole that had been excavated, so we could see all the features underground. So a real camera from there. We have a whole bunch of other artifacts that all go back to their origin at the Nevada test site. And so those still exist at the test site today, and we still get things donated from the Department of Energy and its contractors, and we incorporate them as our space and ability allow, and also as our customers' interests change. We try to be always responsible and responsive to our guests' feedback.
How does the museum keep evolving? I know that there's a Fallout section here. What do you do to keep it interesting? Is that something that you're going to keep going with, like the Fallout and stuff like that?
Yeah, so how's a museum? So it's been in place for 20 years, and a lot of its origin displays, even some that are just over my shoulder, goes back to almost exactly as it was 20 years ago when it opened in 2005. But museum patrons have changed. We know there's a great deal more interest in, instead of just static displays, having more interactive displays. So actually we've opened 4 new major displays this year. The very first one was back in January. We opened a 2,000 square foot display called Atomic Odyssey that has the very first interactive displays. Now it's targeted for middle and high school kids to engage their interest in science. You can go in there and with video panels start experimenting with different types of atomic structures. You start understanding that elements aren't just uranium or fission products that you hear about in other parts of the museum. It's everything that makes up the world that surrounds them, including themselves. So atomic structure is one of the first interactives we have, but we also have displays on fission and fusion. We have displays on radioactivity, and that's kind of where we want to lean as a museum going forward, finding ways to not only tell the history of nuclear science, but also do it in a manner that is immersive for our guests. We open displays on Miss Atomic Bomb. We open displays on Fallout that we'll show you here in a few minutes. And the Fallout display is an interesting one. We've been talking to Bethesda Game Studios for well over a year, and they actually had come to Las Vegas for Pioneer Days, came by the museum and said, "Hey, we love your museum. What can we do in partnership?" And so we started talking with them, working with them. How can we do that? And so we were able to come up with some pretty cool ways of immersing both the content of the video game, but also some of the content from the Amazon Prime streaming show. So we'll show you that. And then lastly, we have some new displays that will be opening here within the next 30 days that will memorialize 75 years of testing that have gone on at the Nevada test site. And around the corner, we're hopeful to open even new things in 2026. We want to take people back in time to the 1950s. You know, you'd asked the question earlier about what were people thinking as they were watching those above ground tests in the 1950s down from Glitter Gulch, down in downtown Las Vegas. We want to recreate those streets in Las Vegas as if you're walking out and you see that blast go on in the distance, taking you back in time and maybe making you then start asking the questions, well, what were people thinking about that? Because wasn't there radioactivity in that cloud? Why were they accepting of it? What was their thoughts? So not just engaging you, not just showing you something visual, but encouraging you to start that questioning manner that may drive some of the other displays that the guests will then go and look at.
Brings up a question. Is there still radiation over the Las Vegas Valley, do you think?
So is there radiation over the Las Vegas Valley? There is naturally occurring radiation all over the place. In fact, if you flew to Las Vegas, you got more radiation from cosmic sources than you would just on ground level because the atmosphere provides some shielding. So there is radiation that surrounds you. If you've ever had an X-ray for a broken bone, you're getting a small amount of radiation. If you got dental X-ray, same deal. So you get that. The question I always get is, well, what is coming from the Nevada test site from all of those years of testing? And actually, one of the programs that I managed was all of the environmental monitoring that went on at the Nevada test site. And what I can tell you is it's a fraction of 1% is the amount of radiation that is still remaining coming from the Nevada test site, well below all national standards. Again, you get a lot more radiation from that plane trip than you ever would standing either out on the edge of the test site looking onto it. A lot of it is just because some of that original radiation has decayed away over the many decades from its original use. And so there's just not much left.
What do you hope people take away from this museum when they're walking out the door? As far as like education, history, anything, what do you want them to walk out of here thinking and realizing?
Well, from my perspective, a couple different things. I want people to understand some of the sacrifices of the people, not only just in Las Vegas that worked out at the test site, but around the country. The folks in Las Vegas, again, I rode the bus going out to the test site. You would get it on the bus generally around 4:30 in the morning, and you come back late in the evening. It's a long, long, long day, working on things that sometimes you couldn't come back and talk with your spouse about. You had to maintain classification and privilege because of those activities. So it made for kind of a difficult thing. In fact, even growing up with my father and all the things that he worked on, you know, there would just be times where he would just tell the family, "I can't tell you what I'm working on." Sometimes he would go to the test site and be gone for days, sometimes weeks, and that's just what you had to deal with as part of a family of someone that worked within the weapons complex. And I think you'd see that with people at other locations around the site. So there was a family sacrifice, there was an individual sacrifice. We want to make sure that people take away and understand some of those stories that go with that. Above and beyond it, though, there's just two other elements. One is an understanding that even as these terrible weapons of war were being created, and tested at locations in the Pacific and later on at the Nevada test site, and also at locations around the world by other nations. Understanding that with that testing there was a consequence, and we need to understand those consequences. The atmospheric testing, there was deposition that went on from it. We need to make sure that we acknowledge that. In underground testing, there was remnant radioactivity. We need to understand what's happening with that. And at other sites around the world, same thing, understand what goes on with it. So by coming to a museum like this, it gives you an understanding of what was those environmental consequences from some of those testing locations here at the Nevada test site as well as around the world. Lastly, and Dad used to kind of say this a lot, reminding folks that, these are terrible weapons of war. He used to always say that one of his concerns were today's modern leaders may not remember exactly how destructive they were. They certainly weren't born during the days often of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. They've only seen films of it. And certainly since there hasn't been an underground nuclear weapons test since 1992, they haven't seen the conduct of that. Well, reminding ourselves collectively as a world that these are very, very destructive weapons, and we should always remember that and hope that they'll never have to be used.
Would you entertain a couple questions?
Certainly.
So there's two that were brought up on the Joe Rogan Experience. One is that the Nevada test site footage of the buildings getting blown apart aren't real because the cameras aren't moving. Do you know the technique that they use to film that so that the camera and the film isn't messed up?
So, again, I wasn't there during atmospheric testing, so I can just tell you what I've learned over the many years and talking to so many people that actually were out there in the 1950s. So I would disagree with that conclusion that it was all forged data. Why? Well, one of the things that was developed during nuclear testing was extremely high-speed photography, because you needed to capture images of that atomic test in a fraction of a second. So you're watching, for example, after the test starts, you're seeing just images of the fireball as it's beginning to expand because you're taking such high-speed photography. The company called EG&G, and some of its founders contributed to development of just that high-speed technology. So my belief is that that same sort of camera technology was utilized in all aspects of capturing those images. So if you see a nuclear blast that's going through a series of pine trees, and that actually was conducted out at the Nevada test site, they cut down the trees from a surrounding mountain, brought them out to the test site, and tested them with an above-ground blast. Belief is that all those tests were captured with high speed so that you could get second by millisecond what was happening with each of the trees, because they wanted to understand if warfighters were taking refuge amidst pines. Were they going to provide them more shielding from radioactivity, or they were going to be a bigger hazard as the shock wave went through those trees? Those were some of the things they were trying to understand, and you could often only capture that with high-speed photography. So with each and every one of those above-ground tests, they would have camera mounts at a whole bunch of different locations just to capture it. So I kind of disagree.
Hello, my name is Joseph Kent. I'm the Chief Community Officer and Curator here at the Atomic Museum. Right next to me is the Rapotronic camera. The Rapotronic camera was designed in the 1940s at MIT by Harold Doc Edgerton. They would use cameras like these at the Nevada test site to capture the progression of an atomic bomb right after detonation. It would be capturing it within milliseconds of that explosion. They would place these cameras strategically around the test and place them in bunkers to help protect them from the force of the blast. If you'd like to learn more about the Rapotronic camera and high-speed photography in general, please come and visit us at the Atomic Museum. We're open 7 days a week, and we'd love to have you.
One last question before we get to the exhibits. They say there's been an uptick of UFO sightings since we started testing out nuclear weapons. The theory is that the aliens are coming to kind of shield us from ourselves, protect us from ourselves, or there's a uptick in, high-tech craft that the United States is developing. Have you, because you worked out at the site, did you ever experience any kind of UFO phenomenon, or did you see an uptick of it?
Again, I started out there in 1989. Never saw a UFO out there. Never saw any sort of uptake of that, even just in Las Vegas. So I really have no idea where the origin of that might be. I actually have, amongst other things, I'm on a board of advisors for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And one of the other board members that's with me actually wrote a book on UFOs. And I don't believe even in his book, he talks about that there is UFOs tied to the Nevada test site. So not quite sure where that came from, but there's always speculation. When you don't know something, people like to fill in the blanks with their beliefs on what's really behind it.
Thank you for entertaining those questions. I appreciate your time.
It's good.
If you were driving from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City on U.S. Highway 91, you'd pass through St. George, Utah, population 4,000, just state line of Nevada. It's in the morning. Pretty deserted at this hour. Everything is closed down. Everyone's asleep. Everyone's been delivering over the same route for 12 years. Never missed a day. And a police officer patrols the lonely downtown beat. And another night owl keeps his place open 24 hours for tourists coming through. Since the rest of the town was sound asleep, only our night owl saw it, that great flash in the western sky. An atomic bomb at the Nevada test site 140 miles to the west. But it's old stuff to St. George, routine. They've seen a lot of them ever since 1951. Nothing to get excited about anymore. As this thriving community went about its business, youngsters on their way to school, housewives starting on the chores of the day, merchants opening their doors, the folks at home listening to the radio program.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this program to bring you important news. Word has just been received from the Atomic Energy Commission that due to a change in wind direction, the residue from this morning's atomic detonation is drifting in the direction of St. George. It is suggested that everyone remain indoors for 1 hour or until further notice. There is no danger. This is simply routine Atomic Energy Commission safety procedure. To prevent unnecessary exposure to radiation, it is better to take cover during this period. Parents need not be alarmed about children at school. No recesses outdoors will be permitted. Please stay indoors and advise your friends and neighbors who may not hear this announcement to do likewise.
And as the people at St. George took cover, it was natural that some of them had questions about atomic tests. Questions like, why do we have to test bombs? And the answers are found in still another question. the question of national survival. For testing of atomic weapons goes on for a vital reason: our national defense. We have no choice. To fall behind any other nation in atomic progress is a national risk. To assure our defense, we have to keep our atomic strength at top level by testing new ideas and principles and applying these principles in weapons. That's why we have the Nevada test site. It's sort of a backyard workshop, the most unusual scientific workshop in the world. 640 square miles of desert and mountains, 65 miles northwest from Las Vegas, set in some of the loneliest acres the world has ever seen. But this barren region is not barren of brains. Some of the outstanding minds of the nation work in this sprawling outdoor laboratory. The scientists who have harnessed this great force and opened the door to the atomic age. The military men who may have to apply this force in the defense of our nation. Technicians who assemble the complex instruments and equipment. And lots of others who build, who plan, who record, who maintain security, and the countless tasks essential to this important project. These men are here for a vital purpose. Since we have no atomic monopoly, we must continue to increase our knowledge of atomic weapons to guarantee maximum military atomic strength. But naturally, the folks in St. George, as they look upon their silent city, wonder why weapons are tested inside the United States instead of the far Pacific area. The answer is, we need both testing areas. In the vast, isolated reaches of the mid-Pacific, we test weapons of tremendous strength. Only smaller bombs are tested inside the United States. These smaller devices, just as important to America's weapons strength as the larger ones, could not be tested so quickly if they had to be taken to the Pacific Proving Ground about 5,000 miles from our western coast. A Pacific test is quite a job. Past operations out there involved 9,000 men, like 2 complete cities of St. George, and food and supplies to maintain those men. Obviously, an operation like this takes time, months and months of time, while atomic progress waits. So our need is pressing for a nearby test site, a place where nuclear tests can be made frequently, quickly, and more economically. And thus, in 1951, the Nevada test site was set up for the first in a series of continental tests that are part of our continuing atomic program. Because the Nevada test site is close in, scientists conduct a test on one day and return to their laboratories on the next to start evaluating results immediately. This greatly speeds up our weapons development program. Those problems that cannot be solved in a laboratory are taken to the outdoor workshop in Nevada. This is called Ground Zero. Around this center point of the explosion are located instruments and equipment that are part of diagnostic experimentation, which is scientific language meaning, well, what happened? Did the idea work? And as you might expect, there are some humdingers in the way of gadgets. Some we cannot describe for security's sake. Some we can mention, like the high-speed camera that takes pictures at 1/3 of a second, or the instruments that measure heat in millions of degrees and a light intensity hundreds of times brighter than the sun. Scientists must know exactly what occurs before, during, and after a nuclear explosion. While most field tests are held largely to answer the questions of the scientists, these tests are also designed to answer as many other questions as possible. The armed forces, for instance, they've got to know. Military scientists conduct experiments to record and evaluate effects of atomic weapons. For training purposes, military personnel observe from foxholes. We also need to know if military equipment can take it. All types are positioned at varying distances from ground zero. Structures also play an important part, not only in military studies, but also in civil defense programs to determine blast and heat effects. Family-type dwellings are constructed right on the site. Civil defense is also concerned with the value of automobiles as shelters in an atomic attack. Biomedical tests, using animals such as mice and pigs for research subjects, are conducted to gain important information about radiation effects on cells and tissue. And a lot of other government agencies also set up special tests and experiments. Finally, the work is done. Preparations are completed. Another valuable test is ready. Shot day is tomorrow morning. The early morning air is cool, crisp. The outdoor laboratory workshop is deserted, silent. A series of activities now proceed on a prearranged schedule. Notice is sent to all nearby communities that the shot will go as scheduled. Planes take to the air for sampling, tracking, and photography. In ample time before the shot, mobile monitoring teams are directed to the path of the radiation fallout as predicted by the weather forecast. At their stations in the control point, perhaps 8 miles from the tower, are the key men of the test, the scientists. To them, this is the payoff, the climax of careful planning and preparation. The test pattern is complete.
Attention, please. Minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Tower of Steel is now only a tower of smoke. This was a civil defense house. Here was the first row of automobiles. This was a tank. This was a jeep. This was a jet plane. This a bomber. These were structures. At the site, radiological safety teams monitor the radiation level. Now, scientists recover instruments that have recorded what you might call the fingerprints of nuclear fission. For these imprints answer questions that will speed our progress in weapon development and efficiency. But is all this difficult work worthwhile? Is the Nevada test site living up to expectations? The answer is yes. We have come a long, long way in a few years. Not only do we have a large stockpile of heavy weapons for our big bombers, but also smaller atomic bombs for jet fighters to carry for tactical purposes, and atomic artillery to support frontline troops. Gathering strength for the long-term defense of freedom, we now have a family of weapons for a broad range of military uses to discourage aggression, to support peace. Their number, variety, and efficiency has been greatly increased. Without a continental test site, we would now find ourselves years behind our present atomic development. And this is why the Nevada test site is absolutely essential as a backyard workshop. Okay, so Nevada is important. So we have to test bombs out there for national defense. But what's being done about the safety of the public? Well, to answer this question, to understand the extensive precautions taken for public safety, let's go to the control point, the nerve center of the outdoor laboratory. The test organization staff is meeting, as it does before every shot. Go or no go? That's the question before the test manager and his advisors, experts in the fields of biology and medicine, public health, meteorology, and blast. Before a nuclear device is detonated, every possible precaution is taken for safety. Public safety is the main consideration. There are 3 factors to consider. First, light. The brilliant flash can cause momentary blindness to a pilot or to a motorist. Aircraft are warned through Civil Aeronautics Authority of the zone closed to air traffic at all altitudes. Motorists are temporarily halted on nearby highways. The second factor is blast. As a further careful precaution, relatively small charges of high explosive are set off at 1 and 2 hour intervals before the atomic detonation. Sensitive scientific instruments at various points around the test site record the results of the high explosive blast, thus enabling the test organization to predict the effect and direction of the blast from the upcoming atomic detonation. Minor damage is minimized by warning communities to open windows and doors to equalize pressure. And, of course, the test itself will be postponed if it appears that a community might be hit hard by blast. The third effect is radiation. Let's consider radioactivity and the weather conditions which determine what happens to it. As the test staff considers all vital factors involved in the test operation, of top importance is the weather forecast. Weather, as well as technical factors, are reviewed and evaluated by the experts in arriving at a decision. If conditions seem unfavorable, or become so at any time up to 10 minutes before shot time, the test is postponed. If conditions seem favorable and safe, an order to proceed is issued. After a shot has been fired, the atomic cloud, like a giant vacuum cleaner, has sucked up dirt and debris from the Earth and is full of radioactive particles. Is it dangerous? Yes, right now it is. You wouldn't want to go into it, but neither would you deliberately walk into a blazing fire. You have to use common sense. There may be an area of real danger which may extend a few miles from ground zero. This is one reason why entry into the test site is restricted. Helicopters warn hunters, hikers, and desert migrants to avoid the test site region. Yes, livestock grazing within a few miles of the site of detonation have, in a few instances, suffered skin and eye injuries from radiation, but otherwise were in good health. Justified claims by owners have been compensated. Extensive studies have concluded that animals grazing at greater distances have not been injured by radiation. The AEC will continue to give advance notice to livestock owners. To minimize the area of real danger and reduce the fallout outside the control area, only relatively small nuclear devices are tested in Nevada, leaving the larger detonations to the Pacific. As the cloud moves out, it becomes dispersed, and at the same time its radioactivity rapidly decreases. Past experience has shown that some activity will be detected across the country. The important thing is to keep the amount of radioactive contamination to as low a level as possible for human exposure. This is not left to chance. At the control point, the path of the cloud is charted with the greatest possible accuracy. This can be done because the cloud leaves a trail as it moves along, a trail of radioactive particles that can be detected and measured. Some of the tiny radioactive particles settle back to Earth as the wind disperses the cloud. These particles are called fallout. The bulk of the particles soon fall out and the cloud disappears. An invisible remnant of radioactive material is lifted high, wide, and far by the winds, eventually settling to Earth. But radioactive fallout beyond several miles from the test site has not been known to be serious. It has not constituted an appreciable danger to persons, animals, crops, property, or industry. We must remember that radiation is not a new thing on this Earth of ours. Since the beginning of time, the Earth has been bombarded by radiation from outer space. Cosmic rays and high-energy particles rain down from space upon each and every one of us every second of our lives. We are also struck by radiation from the materials in the Earth itself. All this is known as background radiation. It is part of nature. We can't control it. Radiation from fallout temporarily adds to this background level. It is the total amount of radiation that is important. That is why very careful considerations are given for firing every atomic test shot, so that the fallout will add as little radiation as possible to that of natural background sources. Yes, the very nature of testing weapons for national defense requires we accept the possibility of some exposure to additional radiation. There is some potential risk. But this additional radiation has been kept far below harmful amounts in areas beyond a few miles outside the test site boundaries. The rigid requirements controlling the firing of each nuclear device have made this control possible. To provide even further assurance, radiation monitoring teams are continually on the job during the test periods, guarding the safety of the public. In fact, a monitoring system on a national scale has been established to keep track of the movement and direction of the cloud. Monitoring is not confined just to areas near the test site. Moving outward from the outdoor laboratory, you would find 15 fixed air sampling stations in the vicinity of the test site, and special mobile monitoring teams operated jointly by the Atomic Energy Commission and the U.S. Public Health Service. These teams must be able to move quickly into the projected path of the atomic cloud. Instruments and equipment are set up to determine the background radiation level before the cloud arrives, and readings are continued for several days after the cloud has passed. Special Air Force planes follow the cloud approximately 600 miles from the test site. Reports from all mobile monitoring teams are flashed regularly by radio and phone to the control point at the test site. This information is used effectively in many ways, such as keeping public health officials informed in the states adjacent to the test site. Through the cooperation of about 100 U.S. Weather Bureau stations, samples of the atomic cloud are collected on gummed paper throughout the United States and sent to AEC's Health and Safety Laboratory in New York City for counting. These samples from many localities of the United States are processed, and at a glance we know how much fallout dropped in every section of the country. This information is for the use of health authorities, research people, scientists, industry using sensitive materials. It is given to the U.S. Weather Bureau, whose meteorological specialists further evaluate and analyze the fallout reports. These reports, incidentally, are extremely useful to meteorologists in the study of wind currents and the movement of air masses. Radiation in the air acts like dye placed in water. It can be traced. Its direction and speed can be recorded. Some people think atomic bombs can affect the weather. Following extensive studies, no relationship between atomic detonations and weather has been established. An atomic bomb is puny compared to the forces of nature and is completely lost in the vast oceans of the sky. What then was the story at St. George? Here are the facts. The go or no-go meeting, after carefully reviewing all factors, found conditions were favorable. The go-ahead signal was given, and the shot fired the following morning. The predicted path of fallout was to the south of the city. Then the local wind changed. The cloud approached the city. The word was spread throughout the community, and the citizens calmly took cover. 1 hour and 50 minutes later, at 11:25 a.m., the all-clear announcement was broadcast. Actually, when the invisible cloud had passed, the total amount of radiation deposited on St. George was far from hazardous. Then you may ask, why were the people asked to stay indoors? For a very simple reason. The Atomic Energy Commission doesn't take chances on safety. It is the AEC's policy to keep to a minimum any exposure of persons to radiation. This wide safety margin controls AEC's attitude toward radiation involved in any of its activities. So the citizens of St. George were asked to go indoors to avoid unnecessary exposure. The amount of radioactivity that fell on St. George was not dangerous. But the AEC felt the precaution to avoid exposure was good common sense. Such caution will continue to govern operations relative to the Nevada test site. With this rigid standard of safety, testing of atomic weapons must go on. Orderly, well-conceived testing must continue. The testing of atomic weapons at Nevada is essential in the world of today to our existence as a nation. The towering cloud of the atomic age is a symbol of strength, of defense, of security for freedom-loving people everywhere, people who want peace. For as President Eisenhower has pointed out to all the world, this country, which is building a full-scale atomic power plant, wants nuclear energy to serve the needs of mankind, deeply desires and is working to help create an international atomic energy agency to adapt nuclear energy to all the arts of peace.
Thanks for watching Untitled Interview. If you liked the conversation you just watched, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you're interested, there's lots more just like that right here.